The gentle announcement echoed through the quiet atmosphere of the first-class lounge at the international airport. Mr. Henry Johnson, a slender man with silvery white hair, carefully supported his wife, Martha, as they made their way to the boarding gate. They weren't accustomed to the luxury of first-class travel, but this time their only son, Michael Johnson, had decided to gift them a memorable trip. Michael, the owner of a large corporation, always wanted his parents to enjoy the finest things in life after years of hard work raising him. Mrs. Martha smiled softly as they stepped into the airplane cabin. The interior was exquisite. Premium leather seats, spacious arrangements, and soothing ambient lighting that exuded relaxation. They found their seats, settled in, and began to unwind. Martha lightly touched her husband's hand, her eyes sparkling. Can you believe this, Henry? Did you ever think we'd be sitting here in first class being treated like this? Henry nodded, his voice raspy yet warm. We have an incredible son, Martha. This isn't just a plane ticket, it's his way of showing us his love and gratitude. But their quiet joy didn't last long. Just as they were getting comfortable, a young woman in a crisp flight attendant uniform entered the cabin. Heather Watson, the head flight attendant, exuded confidence, but her sharp, judgmental gaze landed squarely on the Johnsons. With her flawlessly styled blonde hair and an air of arrogance, Heather took pride in working in first class, a place she believed should be reserved only for the right kind of people. Heather glanced at the Johnsons again, her lips curling into a slight, mocking smile. Excuse me, but I need to check your tickets, she said, her tone cold, despite the fact that the couple was clearly seated in the correct seats. Henry looked up, his aged yet steady eyes radiating calm. He retrieved the tickets from his coat pocket and handed them to Heather. Here are our tickets, miss. Heather took the tickets, barely hiding her annoyance. She examined them deliberately, as if searching for a reason to deny their validity. These are first-class tickets, she said, dragging out her words. But I can't help wondering how you could afford them. The remark was like an invisible dagger to the Johnsons' dignity. Still, Henry maintained his composure. Our son purchased these tickets for us, he replied evenly. Heather smirked. Oh, really? Your son must be doing quite well for himself. A few other passengers glanced over but remained silent. They seemed accustomed to Heather's behavior, a person who relished using her biases to judge others. Heather didn't stop there. She scanned the cabin, deliberately raising her voice to draw the attention of other passengers. So where are you two from? Heather asked, her tone laced with an artificial sweetness, as if trying to start small talk but with a clear intent to ridicule. Martha gently replied, We're from a small town in Alabama. Heather let out a light laugh, one tinged with unmistakable condescension. Oh, such a peaceful place, isn't it? I'd imagine there aren't many first-class flights passing through there. Henry's eyes momentarily flashed with sharpness. He recognized the deeper insult behind her seemingly casual remark. Yet, under the watchful gazes of other passengers, he chose to remain silent, not wanting to escalate the situation so early in the flight. Heather continued smirking as she held their tickets and walked toward the front of the cabin, not forgetting to glance back at them. Her voice, deliberately loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, carried an air of derision. Strange to see people like that here. Martha watched her retreat, clutching her handkerchief tightly. Henry, did you see the way she looked at us? She thinks we don't belong here. Henry gently patted his wife's hand, his expression thoughtful. Martha, don't let her words ruin our trip. Our son arranged this to make us happy. Let's focus on that. The first moments of the flight passed under an unspoken tension. Heather kept finding ways to trouble the Johnsons. She insisted they move their carry-on luggage to the storage area at the back of the plane, despite it meeting all size regulations and already being properly stored. This size isn't allowed in first class, Heather stated with a tone that brooked no argument. We need space for the other passengers. Henry glanced around. But there's still plenty of space here, miss. We can leave it without inconveniencing anyone. Heather shook her head, her expression as though he had just suggested something absurd. Those are the rules. If you don't want to cooperate, I'll have to get the co-pilot involved. Once again, Henry decided to stay calm. He didn't want to create a scene, especially as he noticed his wife beginning to feel uneasy. Standing up, He carefully moved their luggage to the back of the plane under the curious eyes of other passengers. Throughout the first hours of the flight, Heather did not relent. When serving meals, she intentionally skipped over the Johnsons, only returning after they had to call her several times. Even then, when Martha asked for a cup of hot tea, Heather deliberately brought a lukewarm cup instead. "Here's your tea," Heather said, placing the cup on the tray table with enough force to spill some of the liquid. Martha glanced at the damp table, her eyes reflecting quiet hurt but still managing to maintain her composure. "Could you please bring me another cup? This one has gone cold." Heather crossed her arms and leaned forward, her expression dripping with condescension. "I think you should be satisfied with what you're given. This isn't a cafe where you can order things to your liking." Martha felt a sharp pang in her chest, but before she could respond, Henry gently took her hand. "It's all right, Martha. Let it go. We don't need any more trouble." Heather smirked and walked away, leaving the Johnsons sitting there, Stevie says, feeling as if they were trapped under the scrutinizing stares of everyone around them. The breaking point came as the flight neared New York. Heather, apparently unsatisfied with her petty antics, decided to escalate the situation. When Martha requested a blanket to keep warm, Heather returned with a mocking smile. "We're out of blankets. You should have brought your own if you get cold so easily." Martha, after enduring so much, could no longer stay silent. "Miss, I don't think you have the right to treat us this way. We're customers like everyone else on this flight." Heather, as if her pride had been challenged, snapped back immediately. "Customers? I've never seen customers as troublesome as the two of you. I can't imagine how you could afford first-class tickets. Or were they a handout?" That comment was the last straw. Henry stood up, his voice firmer than ever. "You've gone too far. We've tried to be patient, but that doesn't give you the right to insult us." Heather, refusing to back down, stepped closer to Henry, her face inches from his. "Do you think you can give me orders on this flight? If you're unhappy, you're welcome to leave when we land. In fact, I'll make sure you're removed." As Heather finished speaking, the atmosphere in the cabin froze. A few passengers turned to look at the Johnsons, but most remained silent, unwilling to involve themselves in the situation. Their mixed expressions of sympathy and apathy only made the cabin feel more oppressive. Martha clung tightly to Henry's hand, her eyes welling with tears. Henry, maintaining his characteristic composure, looked directly at Heather and said, "You're not just disrespecting us, you're disgracing yourself. A flight attendant should know how to treat everyone with fairness." But his words only seemed to fuel Heather's anger. She scoffed and stepped even closer, locking eyes with Henry. "Dignity? Don't lecture me about dignity. If you're not happy with the service here, you can leave. And let me remind you, you're sitting in first class, a place that isn't meant for people who don't belong." Then, without warning, Heather raised her hand and delivered a sharp slap to Henry's face. The sound echoed through the cabin, drawing gasps from the passengers. Martha screamed in horror. "Henry, what is she doing?" Henry staggered slightly, but quickly steadied himself, his hand moving to his reddened cheek. Around them, the cabin descended into a tense silence, broken only by the murmur of shocked whispers. Heather stood there, her face cold and unmoving, as if what she had just done was entirely normal. "Consider this your warning," she said flatly. Don't you dare lecture me again. If you do, I'll make sure you and your wife are removed from this flight immediately." Martha, trembling but resolute, stood up and summoned all her courage to confront Heather. "Do you think you have the right to humiliate us like this? We don't deserve to be treated this way, and you will be held accountable for your actions." Heather shrugged nonchalantly, showing no hint of remorse. "Accountable? Do you even know who my uncle is? He's the co-pilot of this flight. If I want, he'll call security, and you'll be escorted off this plane in no time." Henry gently rubbed his cheek, still stinging from the slap. "You can do whatever you want," he said, his voice low but commanding, "but I promise you, this won't end here." Not long after, Captain Luke Watson, the co-pilot of the flight and Heather's uncle, entered the cabin. A middle-aged man with a commanding presence and an air of arrogance, he immediately looked toward Heather. "What's going on here?" Luke asked, his tone authoritative. Heather stepped forward, feigning innocence. "Uncle Luke, these two passengers are causing trouble. They've been complaining and insulting me. I don't think they should stay on this flight." Henry raised an eyebrow and stood tall. "Sir, we have caused no trouble. Your niece has been insulting and disrespecting us since we boarded the plane, and she even slapped me." Luke frowned, though not out of guilt. Instead, he turned to Heather and asked, "Is this true?" Heather quickly replied, "They're exaggerating everything, Uncle. I was just doing my job." Luke nodded, fully trusting his niece's words. "All right, I'll handle this." Turning to the Johnsons, his voice turned cold. "If you can't comply with the rules, I'll have to ask you to leave the flight." This time, Henry's calm resolve cracked. "I'll leave this flight," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "But before I go, I want you and everyone here to remember that the injustice you've committed will not be forgotten." Heather smirked smugly. "Good. Then go." Henry took Martha's hand tightly as they left the cabin. But just before exiting, he pulled out his phone and made a call that neither Heather nor Luke could have anticipated. "Michael," Henry said, his voice calm but firm, "it's your father. We need to talk." As the Johnsons exited the cabin, Heather stood with a smug expression on her face, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. A few passengers murmured among themselves, but none dared to intervene. The looming influence of co-pilot Luke Watson and Heather's brazen arrogance cast a tense, chilling atmosphere over the flight. Outside the cabin, Henry held tightly onto Martha's hand, guiding her to a seat in the waiting area for passengers denied boarding. He took a deep breath and lifted his phone to his ear. On the other end, a deep, calm voice answered, "Dad, what's going on? Why are you calling at this hour?" Henry slowly began explaining, detailing every instance of Heather's insults and harassment throughout the flight, culminating in her slapping him in the middle of the cabin. As he spoke, his voice wavered, not with anger, but with profound hurt. He had never imagined that, at his age, he and his wife would be subjected to such humiliation. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Michael Johnson, their son, spoke with a tone as cold as steel. "Stay where you are, Dad. I'll handle this." Michael Johnson wasn't just the owner of the airline, he was one of the most influential figures in the U.S. aviation industry. Known for his decisive leadership and zero tolerance for injustice, Michael wasted no time after his father's call. He immediately contacted the airline's management. "I need a full list of the crew on flight NY-275 right now," Michael demanded during an urgent video conference with his leadership team. "Specifically, I want details on the first-class lead and the co-pilot." Within minutes, all the information Michael requested appeared on his screen. Heather Watson, the lead flight attendant, had a history of complaints regarding her attitude toward passengers. However, her connections with her uncle, co-pilot Luke Watson, had shielded her from facing disciplinary action. Michael narrowed his eyes as he read through the reports. This time, there would be no leniency. As Michael took steps to address the situation, the plane remained grounded, delayed due to the incident involving the Johnsons. Heather, still in the cabin, began to grow uneasy as the delay dragged on. Some passengers started questioning why the flight had not yet departed, but Heather quickly reassured them, claiming it was merely a technical issue. Suddenly, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, our flight will be delayed for a few more minutes due to a special situation. We appreciate your patience." Heather frowned, irritation bubbling inside her. What special situation could they possibly mean? She strode briskly toward the cockpit to question her uncle, but before she could reach him, a group of airport staff and airline representatives boarded the plane. At the head of the group was a tall man in a sharp suit, his piercing gaze commanding immediate attention. He walked straight to the first-class cabin, where Heather stood frozen, as if paralyzed by the weight of his presence. "You're Heather Watson, correct?" the man asked, his voice clear and icy. Heather swallowed hard, trying to maintain her composure. "Yes, that's me. Is there a problem?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled a folder from his briefcase, opened it, and handed it to her. "I'm a legal representative for Michael Johnson, the owner of this airline. He has been informed about your behavior on this flight. Effective immediately, I need you to step off the plane." Heather's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? What did you say? Michael Johnson? Don't tell me that, old man." The representative cut her off, his voice firm. Yes, the couple you insulted are Michael Johnson's parents. He has ordered both you and co pilot Luke Watson to disembark immediately. Furthermore, you will face an internal investigation regarding your conduct. Heather took a step back, her lips trembling. No, this can't be. I was just doing my job. But no one in the group paid any attention to her excuses. Two security officers stepped forward, instructing Heather to surrender her ID badge and leave the aircraft. Simultaneously, co pilot Luke Watson was summoned to face the same directive. As Heather was escorted off the plane, the cabin erupted into murmurs and whispers. Some passengers, previously silent out of fear, began to speak up. I saw the whole thing, one woman said. She treated that elderly couple terribly. She deserves this. A man nodded in agreement. Exactly. I don't know who they are, but it was clear from the start that the flight attendant was way out of line. Heather kept her head down, unable to meet anyone's gaze as she walked off the plane. Heather's feet felt like lead as she was escorted through the airport. The whispers trailing behind her echoed like voices in a long, empty corridor. Each comment pierced her pride like a dagger. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Mere minutes ago, she had been the authority in the cabin, confident she was in control. Now, she was being dragged down, stripped of her power, and forced to confront the disdainful looks of the people she once looked down upon. As she passed through the aircraft doors, Heather cast a glance toward the Johnsons, who were seated in the waiting area. They didn't look at her. Henry simply held Martha's hand gently, his eyes distant, as though unwilling to acknowledge the bitter reality she embodied. The weight of their silence was heavier than any criticism or reprimand. Heather wanted to say something, to explain, to justify that it wasn't all her fault, but no words came. She lowered her head and walked straight toward the airline's operations office, where she knew worse consequences awaited her. Meanwhile, Henry gently patted Martha's hand, his calm demeanor steadying her. But deep within, he felt the full weight of his wife's pain. Every insult, every degrading act from Heather had been like a knife cutting into both their hearts, a stark reminder that even after all they had endured and achieved, societal prejudice could still reach them in their most peaceful moments. When Michael entered the waiting area, Henry looked up, his eyes lighting up with relief at the sight of his son. Michael, dressed in a sharp black suit, walked with an air of strength and confidence. He didn't need to say much. His presence alone silenced the entire room. Kneeling gently on one knee before his parents, he spoke softly. I'm sorry, he said, his voice deep and steady. I never thought you would have to endure this, and I promise it will never happen again. Martha lightly placed a hand on her son's shoulder, managing a faint smile. You don't need to apologize, Michael. You've done nothing wrong. Michael looked up, his eyes burning with fierce determination. No, Mom, I do need to apologize because I didn't protect you the way I should have, but I'll make it right. Those responsible will pay. Henry placed a hand on his son's other shoulder, his voice calm and full of wisdom. Michael, we don't need anyone to pay. What matters is that we know our worth. Those who can't see it, that's their problem. Michael nodded slightly, but the steel resolve in his eyes didn't waver. He wasn't someone who let injustice slide, especially when it involved the people he loved most. Back in the operations room, Michael called for an emergency meeting with the airline's senior management. Heather, still in a daze, was summoned to a large glass-walled conference room. She sat in a small chair, facing Michael and the other senior executives. Heather Watson, Michael began, his voice cold as ice. Do you know why you're here? Heather opened her mouth, trying to explain, but no words came out. Her head dropped and her hands clenched tightly together. Did you think you had the right to insult my parents? Michael continued, his tone calm but brimming with authority. Did you believe your position gave you the power to humiliate them in front of other passengers? Sir, I was just following protocol, Heather stammered, her voice trembling. I didn't know they were your parents. Michael allowed himself a small, humorless smile. Do you think it matters that they're my parents? What matters is that they are customers, and no customer, no matter who they are, deserves to be treated like that. The room fell silent. Heather began to cry, tears streaming down her face, but Michael was unmoved by her late display of remorse. I've reviewed your record, he said, his voice dropping to a low, deliberate tone, like a wave building in strength. This isn't the first time you've been reported for poor behavior, and yet you've managed to stay here thanks to your connection with our co-pilot. Michael turned to one of the senior managers. I want her suspended immediately, and I expect a formal investigation to be conducted to thoroughly address her violations. Heather collapsed into her chair, unable to utter another word. She understood that it was over. Everything she had relied on, her power, her connections, her position, had crumbled away. As night began to fall outside the airport windows, Michael returned to the waiting area where his parents were seated. He approached them, his gaze softening at the sight of them. Kneeling beside them, his voice was deep and steady. It's done, Michael said. She has been suspended and a formal investigation has been initiated. I'll make sure this never happens again. Martha looked at her son, her eyes filled with both pride and a hint of sadness. Thank you, Michael, but remember, we didn't want this to be about punishment. We just wanted to be treated like everyone else. Michael nodded gently, fully understanding the profound meaning in her words. That's exactly what I'm fighting for. Not just for you, but for anyone who has to face this kind of injustice. Henry placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, his voice warm and calm. You've done enough, son. Let's go home now. The family left the airport together, whispers following them. Some filled with admiration, others with curiosity. Yet the Johnsons walked with quiet dignity, their heads held high. They knew the real victory wasn't just in holding someone accountable, but in standing up for the values of respect and equality, values that could not and should not be compromised. Meanwhile, Heather sat alone in the airline's office, her mind in turmoil. The weight of her actions and their consequences bore down on her like never before. For the first time, she began to realize the harm she had caused, not just to the Johnson family, but also to her own integrity and character. A week later, Michael released an official statement on behalf of the airline, publicly apologizing to his parents and pledging significant changes to company policies. He announced new training programs focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion for all staff, ensuring that no passenger would ever face such discrimination again. The story of what happened on Flight NY275 quickly spread, sparking widespread discussions about societal prejudice and the importance of kindness. For the Johnson family, the experience was a painful reminder of the injustices that still exist in the world. But it also served as a testament to the power of resilience, love, and standing up for what is right. Back home, Henry and Martha sat on their porch, gazing at the starlit sky. We've raised a good man, Martha said softly, her hand clasping Henry's. We have, Henry nodded, his eyes filled with pride, and he's proof of the values we've always believed in. When the Johnson family returned home, the gentle light of their familiar kitchen welcomed them warmly. But Michael didn't stop. He had already begun a larger plan, not just to handle the issue internally, but also to deliver a powerful message to the public. The next morning, he contacted his communications team. I want a speech, public, and I want it sent to every customer of the airline, Michael said, his voice filled with determination. The communications team, fully aware of the story's impact, quickly got to work. Michael's speech wasn't just an apology to his parents. It was a declaration of war against all forms of discrimination in the airline industry. In the speech, Michael stood in front of the camera, his gaze resolute. I'm Michael Johnson, the owner of this airline. But today, I'm not speaking as a businessman. I'm speaking as a son. My parents endured an unacceptable act of disrespect on a flight operated by my company. That didn't just sadden me, it enraged me. He paused, letting his words sink in. This isn't just about my parents. This is about every passenger who has ever felt they were treated unfairly. We all deserve respect, no matter who we are, where we're from, or what we look like. The speech quickly went viral. Across social media platforms, emotional excerpts from Michael's address spread rapidly, accompanied by messages of support from millions of people. The story sparked a wave of public outcry, demanding not only changes in the airline industry, but also broader discussions about equality in society. Meanwhile, Heather, now suspended, sat alone in her small apartment. Her phone screen lit up with an endless stream of messages. Headlines mentioning her name were everywhere, but not with the respect she once thought she commanded. Former colleagues who had once shielded her now remained silent, and even her uncle, co pilot Luke Watson, couldn't help her in this situation. She played Michael's speech, each word piercing the broken remains of her self esteem. Heather realized that she hadn't just lost her job, she had lost the illusion of power and privilege she once held. For the first time, she began reflecting on the choices she had made, the arrogance that blinded her, and the prejudice that had overshadowed her career path. Meanwhile, Michael didn't stop with just a speech. He convened a meeting with the airline's entire board of directors. "We can't just fix this on an individual level. We need to change the system," Michael said. He presented a comprehensive reform plan, including diversity and equity training, stricter monitoring of passenger complaints, and the establishment of an independent team to address discrimination issues. "This isn't just a responsibility," Michael concluded. "This is an opportunity to make things right." The story didn't end with Michael's actions. A week later, a passenger on the flight wrote a blog post detailing the entire incident, from Heather's mistreatment of the Johnsons to Michael's intervention. The post quickly garnered millions of views and became a catalyst for a broader movement demanding meaningful change. Back home, Henry and Martha Johnson received countless letters and well wishes from strangers. But for them, the attention wasn't what mattered most. It was the knowledge that by standing up, they had helped spark something much greater. One evening, as Michael sat with his parents in the warm glow of their kitchen, Martha took his hand and said, "Michael, we're proud of you, not because you stood up for us, but because you stood up for everyone." Michael smiled softly and lowered his head. "Mom, everything I've done is because you and Dad taught me what's right." The story closed not only with justice served, but also with a powerful message that kindness and perseverance can change the world. The Johnson family's story is a reminder of the injustices that still exist in our lives, but also a testament to the strength of resilience, courage, and the value of compassion. By standing up for what's right, we not only change our own destiny, but also create a greater impact for the entire community. Michael Johnson didn't choose to remain silent. He turned his family's pain into a catalyst for positive change, not just for the airline, but for society as a whole. This story reminds us that every action, no matter how small or large, has the power to change the world. If you found this story meaningful, hit like to help spread its message to more people. Don't forget to subscribe to Stories About Kindness to explore more heartfelt, inspiring stories that can make a difference in our lives. You can also leave a comment below to share your thoughts or tell us about stories you've experienced. We'd love to hear your story and help spread kindness within our community. Let's work together to make this world a better place, one small act of kindness at a time.